So at the moment, we have turned to an HTTP GET. We've also implemented our read one. However, in this lesson, I want to learn how to create, because we have our donut form, which then passes up a create. And in subsequent lessons, we're then going to learn how to update and delete. So at the moment, we have a very nice looking container component. Remember, a container is in charge of dealing with the service. We don't want to do this nested in our components. It will then end up very messy. So we have these on create, on update, and the corresponding methods. So we're pretty much ready to go. We just need to provide the implementation to each of our methods. So let's begin with our create. Now to do this, we cannot create over an existing item. I mean, we could, but it will then create a duplicate. So what we're going to do is just put something that doesn't exist and then save it out. This then presents us with a brand new form. So at this point, we can enter some data, go ahead and press create, and things will then trigger an on create. So it's up to us inside of our service now to go and implement, using Angular's HTTP, how to actually send this piece of data to our database. Now in similar fashion, we can say return this.http. Now instead of a get, we want to use a post. So when we create new data, we want to post that data off to the server. When we update, we want to use a put request. And when we delete, we want to use a delete request. Now, much like Angular's get, we can also supply a generic type. Now, because this is going to create a single item, we're going to pass just a single donut rather than an array, as we have done above with our get. We have our generic type of donut array. So down below, we can call our HTTP post. We then pass in the API/donuts. And we also then want to add the item of what we want to create. So if we hover over our post, you can see that we have the URL, which is of type string, and then we have the body, which is of type any. So Angular doesn't care what you're then posting off. So we need to now specify a second argument, and this is just going to contain our payload, which is then given to us via our creation argument. I am going to comment out these two lines for now. We'll save it out, go to our donut single component. Now, here's a really important thing. This is actually going to do absolutely nothing until we call .subscribe. So if you find yourself thinking, oh hey, well I've invoked .create and it's not working, that's because you need to subscribe. Observables by design are what we call lazy. They will only trigger when we subscribe to them and they have data. So we can pass in a function, which is then going to get called. So we can say console log created successfully. We can then save this out. We can see this has been reformatted. It's a lot nicer to read. Just imagine in the future as well, when you come back into this component, you've got all your API nice and neatly on new lines. We've got our ng on init that's nice and clean. Our on create that's nice and clean. And as we continue, we're then going to, inside of the success callbacks, start to route back using Angular's router. So we'll then finish this course with a super clean application that you can reference for as long as you like. So now we've hooked up our create. This is going to pass off the donut that the form gives us. Our subscribe is then going to get triggered. So let's open up our inspect, jump into the console. And inside of here, we have returned HTTP post and then passed in our payload. For now, I've completely ignored the existing code. We're going to talk about this in a moment. So let's first go and create a new donut. You can call this whatever you like. Choose a completely random icon. We'll make this super expensive. We'll put it in a limited edition. And we can say very expensive. This, when we press create, is then going to fire off to our local database. We didn't actually see anything happening. However, we do, after a moment, I hope you saw this appear in the console, we have this created successfully. So how do we know if it's actually worked? Our db.json will reveal all. We can jump down and you can see that we have our new donut, which has been added, and it's got a random ID assigned to it. So JSON server, the package which is running in the background, is assigning this ID for us dynamically. We don't have to do anything for this. And we can also confirm that JSON server is picking things up because we can see any requests that we're making, such as our post as we then make those requests. So this is super. We've now completed the creation event. But now that our donut has been created, we now need to go and implement the rest of our logic. We need to add it to our application state. So if we remove our commented out code, we're going to bring back a pipe, and inside we're going to then use our tap. Now, because we have a server response, this is going to give us the donut, at which point we can say this.donuts equals, and then spread in our existing data. Now, before we go any further, we are passing in the payload from the beginning. So what we're going to do instead is pass in our donut, and that is because it's going to now contain an ID. And the ID is the only thing that's changed when we save it to the server. So what's happening from the top? We call create, we pass the payload in, Angular's HTTP post kicks off, goes to API, passes the payload off. It then gets saved in the database. The ID is then added. So we need to know about that ID for when we go and render it in a list and then further click on it. So we can jump into the observable by using tap. We know that it's a single donut because we've provided the type definitions here. And then using our existing logic to set the state and add that item to our application state, we then tack it on the end of our existing array. Now, we cannot see this in action until we've hooked up our routing in the next chapter. The reason we are doing this is because when we press create, we're then going to navigate with the router back. And unless we update the state of our application, we're not actually going to see that new donut in our donuts array. So any action that we want to make, we need to make sure we are then updating it. Otherwise, it's not going to be reflected as we navigate around our app. So that's it for this lesson. That's a nice, easy HTTP post. We pass in the payload, we get it back with the ID, we add it to our data structure. And of course, if we go back to our homepage in our application, we're then going to have that new item. So let's move on and work out how to provide an update and also a deletion.